Hello everyone, I'm Becky Goldsmith with Piece of Cake, and I wanted to show you today how you applique by hand small and intricate shapes. And the shape I'm going to use is from my book, The Quilter's Practical Guide to Color, from this quilt, from the one that says Tiny Huge. Now, huge looks even bigger here than it is in real life. It is pretty small. What I did was, on my computer, I typed up the two words, tiny and huge, and then I enlarged them until I got the letters to be the size I wanted. The H in huge, you can use my finger as a guide to scale. It's not quite 2 inches long. So it's a pretty detailed shape, as you can see. Now I've already made my template and I have traced it. I traced around it, right side up on the right side of the fabric. Notice that the shape is on the diagonal grain of the fabric. That's because it will help the edges to turn under with less fraying and more smoothly. So I've got it to this point. I'm going to set that aside. I went ahead and trimmed it like this. Now I'm going to use a technique called Cutaway applique. And this is a technique that you use on shapes that you know that if you cut them out with an exact seam allowance, they are going to be way too hard to sew. So here I've left a buffer of fabric all the way around the shape. That is, now it varies from a little more than ½ an inch to 1 inch. And I round off the edges because if I had cut this out as a big rectangle, when I sew, my thread would hang up on the points at the corners of the shape. So I've got it to here, and I'm going to finger press here. Now I have already finger pressed this shape all the way around so that you didn't have to watch me do the whole thing. But as you can see, I follow the contours of the shape. I'm being sure to turn the chalk line all the way to the back. And even though it's a little tiny curve and little tiny edges, I'm still getting my fingers in there and finger pressing those lines under. And what that will do is help the fabric turn where I want it to turn once I'm using my toothpick or needle to actually turn it. Now, I'm not going to use an overlay to position this. I'm just going to place it on the fabric and pin it. When I was making the quilt, I was much more careful about the placement. You might be tempted on a shape like this to put your pin right in the middle of the shape, but if I put my pin here, the first thing I'm going to have to do is move the pin because I won't be able to turn under the seam allowance. So you want to plot out how you're going to sew this. So I want to start in the middle of the riser of the H. I'm going to bring my pin down and run it parallel, running the same direction as that line, and I'm moving it, it's almost too close. I'm going to use a smaller, slightly scanter 3/16 inch seam allowance on this, but still I don't want my pin to be too close. As I work down, I'll be coming down this side, so I'm going to want a pin here. And I am, in all likelihood, going to want a pin here so that as I come around this edge, this pin will hold the shape in place. Now, once I turn down this side and am working up through here, these two pins will be able to be removed. But I'm going to need a pin definitely here so that as I work my way around that hole in the H, I've got a pin holding this side of the shape in place. And I may end up needing a few more pins, but for now that holds it firmly in place. This technique is called Cutaway applique because you cut away the excess fabric as you sew. Now, some people like to go ahead and begin trimming before they bring their needle up. I generally bring my needle up always from underneath the applique, never from underneath the background fabric. I bring my needle up and then I trim away. And I don't know why I do that, I just do. But if you're doing what I'm doing here, be sure that you do not cut your thread as you trim away. I'm using my small pair of perfect scissors. I like them for this task more than any other scissor because they're small, easy to control. They have a serrated blade, and I actually want to turn that so that the serrated blade is on the bottom, on the top of the cut. I want the smooth blade underneath the fabric. I want to come around here and follow this. Now, sometimes in a position like this, you might want to turn your scissor and just cut this off. But if you do that, when you come back and have to pick up your cut, it makes it a little harder to see where to start. So what I often do is go a little bit farther, and then when I trim this off, I leave the beginning of the next cut. It will make it easier to pick up where I want to start again. And then I can use my needle and sew. This is a pretty straightforward little shape here. So I can use my needle to do the turning. On small shapes like this, make sure your stitch is not too long. So I consciously use a smaller stitch. Now remember, you want to finish this in your lifetime, so your stitch doesn't have to be so small that you can't see it, but yeah, a short stitch. And sometimes people, when they're working on a small shape like this, think it's somehow different than other shapes. This is an outer point. Now it may be a little tiny small outer point, but it is still just an outer point, and I would turn it the way I would turn any other outer point. Now right here, this pin is going to start being in the way, so I'm going to remove it, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up that cut and cut a little farther down, and I'm going to get that out of my way. And here, I'm going to turn this point the way I would any other. Whoop, I'm going to use my toothpick, dampen the toothpick, I'm going to roll that under, and honestly that turned remarkably well. I might want to pull that in a little more. I'm going to make one stitch. Now this is a short enough space that I'm going to go ahead and make sure I make 2 stitches here. So that I'm holding the center of that side in place. But you know what? I'm looking at the line. There's not even room for 2 stitches. That is a 1 stitch place. I'm going to tack that before I turn the point. And here I'm going into an inner curve, right? That's going to have to be clipped. So while it's always true that it takes 3 clips to make a curve, this might be one of those places where 3 clips is too many. It's such a shallow curve and there's so little seam allowance that I'm going to give that 1 clip right there. And then I'm going to turn this the way I would any other inner curve. I'm going to get in front of it and scoop that under, and that's kind of a point, but I can finagle that in place. The toothpick is easier to use here than your needle because you'll have more control over the stitch. Okay, now I want to be sure to get enough stitches in here to hold that cleanly in place. And I think I want to give this another little bump with the toothpick, and then I'm going to sew. So that's how I would handle that point and curve that follows. And I know you do not have time to watch me sew all the way around this thing. I've got another model to show you where I have sewn down the edge. And here, one where I've shown you that, yeah, you can turn up and go through here. Just exactly the same way that I did the other one. Let me, just to prove this, just so you can see how this part is done, let me stop the camera. I'm going to stop the camera right now, and I'll come back to you when I'm working in this area. I'm back. I've sewn around this corner and down the bottom of the H, and I've done my tack stitch here, and now I've got to clip dead center between these two shapes to get into the center. And honestly, that clip can go all the way up here, and then I'm going to have to do a clip to either side on the curve, but I'll do that as I need to. I can take this pin out. I'm going to carefully clip. Now, when you need to make a clip dead center, remember how your scissors work. Remember that the cut is made where the two blades meet. So when I put my scissor blade in here, I need to remember that the cut happens on the left side of the top blade. So I don't want to center the whole blade. I want to look and be sure that I've got that cut dead center, right? Now once I get past that point, I'm going to go ahead and take this up, but I'm not going to do these deep clips up here quite yet. I'm going to do them in a little bit. I want to worry about where I am here first. So, toothpick, there is almost no seam allowance here. So be very careful how you manipulate that seam allowance under. You don't want it to fray. Let me move my thread out of the way. And it really does want to turn neatly on that finger pressed crease that I put in earlier. You might have to catch a little bit more of the applique fabric here than you otherwise would, because, and that's true especially if your fabric is trying to fray on you. You don't want to try and keep your stitch too close to the edge and have it cause the fabric to fray more. So I want to catch that. I've got a tiny little, I think that little thread, yeah, that was just a loose thread. All right, I'm going to do a tack stitch here. You know, this isn't really any harder than any other applique. What it is a little bit slower, and you've got to be a little more precise. So here, remember there's that little bit of a curve. I'm going to clip that just the tiniest little bit. And come in here, let me make sure I'm on the camera. I'm going to work that under. And it's surprising, as you work, it does not get harder to do. So, in fact, it gets a little easier. I've got the littlest bit of a wrinkle right there. I want to make sure I get that turned under. Oops. You can't see what I'm looking at. You think I'm just looking at this, but I am actually facing the front of my house, and it looks to me like I've got company about to come and ring my doorbell. It sure does, and I don't know why. So, here we go. That's how you do cutaway applique on a very small shape. And I would continue around this shape just exactly the same way. And as I get up here where I need to turn this, I would put a clip here and here and here, and I would turn it under with my toothpick and just continue to sew this shape exactly as I would any other shape. Now, where else might you use cutaway applique? I might use it on this bird, which is a shape that also comes from the color book. And the biggest part of the bird is not really a problem. It's the feet. But I would treat this shape exactly the same way. And when I got down here to the feet, I would treat the feet the way I did the parts of the H. So I hope that you find this helpful. I need to go see who's at my front door. May you have many happy stitches. Thanks for watching.